Good morning to everyone. Good morning. For those of you that have not seen me before, some of you may have because I speak to co-ops quite often. My name is Micheal Pitlock, and I'm currently the Senior Policy Expert for Bee Leaders. Bee Leaders is a USAID funded program here in the Philippines. Our program started in 2013. Actually, 2014, sorry. But I've actually been in the Philippines since 2000. I've been a part of 3 different USAID-funded programs here in the Philippines. During those 15, 16 years, I spent most of them. But then for some reason, we all forgot about it. For the longest time, we forgot about it. And now, we're starting to remember all the good things about demand-side management. You know, and from my perspective, I agree with Serge, it's about time that we remembered why this stuff is good. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, what drives demand-side management. When I look at it, there's 3 main drivers. The first one is price. Okay? When price is high, people start thinking about how can I conserve? How can I be more efficient so that I can save money? Now, here in Mindanao, compared to Luzon and Visayas, you benefited from relatively lower prices than the other 2 island groups. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we kind of forgot. But I think, as you all know, those days are coming to an end. Why? We're getting reduced production out of August and Palangi. And what are we replacing it with? Expensive coal plants, expensive diesel generation, expensive RE. Now, I'm not going to say bad things about RE because Bee Leaders is one of the promoters of renewable energy. And so I'm not going to talk bad about RE. But there is a price to pay. And as you all probably know, one of the things in APIRA, it says that distribution utilities, like all of you, have an obligation to provide service in a least cost manner to your captive customers. Now here in Mindanao, everybody's captive. Okay, you don't have retail competition yet. You don't have all the problems and complications that they're fighting with in Luzon and Visayas. But maybe someday you will. So we have price as a driver. In recent years, because of concerns over climate change, the environmental benefits of DSM are starting to become more in focus. How many of you have heard of the INDC? I don't see any hands going up. INDC, Intended National Determined Contribution. In Paris, back in November 2015, there was a climate change conference put on by the United Nations. The Philippines was a participant. The Philippines made a commitment, an INDC, to reduce its emissions by 70% by 2030. 70%. That's a big number. Okay? So we have this commitment. The government says we're going to do everything we can to reduce emissions. So DSM is going to be a big part of that. Okay, because which sector is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases? The power sector. So you're going to be asked to do your part to help the Philippine government achieve its INDC. So DSM will be a part of that. The third driver that I think is important, we all talk about energy security. Okay, energy security, we can look at it from a supply perspective. We want security of supply, but we also want security of price. So from a price perspective, in thinking about energy security, DSM fits in perfectly. Okay, because all that generation that comes from coal, natural gas, geothermal steam is all priced based on global markets. So even though, for example, we have an indigenous source of natural gas in Malampaya, we're not protected on the price side, because that gas is priced like as if it was purchased or sold on a global market. The Philippines cannot control the global price of fuel. Okay, you're just too small of a market. Actually, there's very few countries that have a significant impact on the global price of fuel. The ones that do are countries like China, India, and the US, because they're big consumers of fuel. Now, not so much the US anymore, because the US doesn't import as much as it used to. It's developed abundant natural gas reserves of its own. It has a lot of coal. But India and China are importing a lot of energy. They're going to drive the global price of fuel, which is going to impact all of us here in the Philippines, because that's how our fuel is priced. So DSM will help us deal with all those issues. When I talk about the power sector, I always like to start out by talking about a pier. Because a pier, whether you're a fan of it or not, sets the framework upon which the sector is to operate. And a pier has a few things to say about DSM. First of all, in the Declaration of Policy, it says to encourage the efficient use of energy and other modalities of demand-side management. Okay, so it's the policy of the government to promote DSM. It defines demand-side management as measures undertaken by distribution utilities to encourage end users in the proper management of their load to achieve efficiency in the utilization of fixed infrastructure in the system. Okay, we want to efficiently use the fixed infrastructure. So what's the fixed infrastructure we're talking about? We're talking about all the wires. Okay, the transmission network, the distribution network, all of those facilities are built to meet peak demand. Now they're there to meet the peak demand. Now if our load factor is very low, we're not utilizing them efficiently. Okay, so one of the things we want to keep in our mind when we're dealing with DSM is we want to do things that improve our load factor. When we improve the load factor, we're efficiently utilizing all that fixed infrastructure, okay, which will lead to lower prices. And under Section 43, under the functions of the ERC will act upon applications for cost recovery. Applications for cost recovery. I went back and I searched the ERC's files to see if I could find a case of cost recovery. And I did. I found one.
What?
And it's by one of the Easties in this room. Does anybody know who it is? Sam Sirocco too. The only problem was, when was it filed? 1998. It was actually an ERB case. From 1998. They had a demand-side program. It was part of it was a lighting program. Replacing incandescent with CFL. Of course, we now know that technology has moved on. Okay, we don't talk so much about CFLs anymore, we talk about lead. But that was the only one I found. In all those years, that was the only one I found, which kind of surprised me. Demand-side management entails actions that influence the quantity or patterns of use of energy consumed by end users, such as actions targeting reduction in peak demand during periods when energy supply systems are constrained. Peak demand management does not necessarily mean decreasing the total energy consumption, but can be expected to reduce the need for investment in networks and power plants. It's not always about reducing the amount of energy. Okay, it's all about the shape of the curve. Okay, because that's where the inefficiency comes from. We all know that the flatter the curve, the least cost, because we're fully utilizing that fixed infrastructure. We're fully utilizing the capacity of those power plants. If you build a 600 megawatt plant, and it has a plant factor of only 50%, half the time you're wasting it, okay? But you're paying for it. It's kind of like the person that buys a car and only uses it on Sunday to drive to church. You're still paying for that car the other days of the week, but you only use it one day. So we want to fully maximize the efficient use of this fixed infrastructure. Some DSM programs target kilowatt hours. Some DSM programs target kilowatts demand. Now let's think about your customers for a while. Right now, all of your customers are captive. A captive customer, as defined in a period, is a customer that does not have choice of supply. Okay, that means those captive customers rely on all of you for both their energy, their supply, as well as the use of your wires, the demand they place upon your wires. Now, if we get to the point where retail competition comes into play, you're still going to be concerned about both supply and demand for your captive customers, but for your contestable customers, you're no longer going to be responsible for supply. That does not mean, and I can't emphasize this enough, that does not mean that you have lost a customer. Because that contestable customer, even though he gets his supply from somebody else, he doesn't rely on you. He relies upon you for something very, very important. The wires. Okay? You will never, ever, ever lose a single customer because of migration to contestability. Because you are always going to be the one providing the wheeling service. You're always going to be the one providing the wires. And so from a demand-side management perspective, you're still going to be concerned about the efficient utilization of that fixed infrastructure. Let's talk in a little more detail about some of the terms that we use when we're talking about demand-side management. One term we use is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is using less energy to provide the same level of energy service. Okay, you heard Max talk about conservation. The conservation meant I'm giving up something. I'm getting less. Well, under energy efficiency, you're not giving up anything in terms of service. The whole idea of energy efficiency is that I can get the same service by by consuming less energy. Okay, examples of that would be insulating a home to use less heating and cooling. Max talked about the building standards. We talk about green buildings. We want our buildings designed to be as energy efficient as possible. I have a house in Ontario, Canada. The winters there are very, very cold. Sub-zero temperatures, lots of snow, very cold. In the summertime, it gets very, very warm, as warm as it is here. So I have to make sure that my house is very well insulated. Otherwise, in the wintertime, I'm heating the great outdoors. If my windows aren't thermal protected, if my ceiling doesn't have enough insulation in it, if the walls don't have enough insulation in them, it's like I'm heating the great outdoors. So we have building standards to make sure there's a certain level of insulation I had to put in the roof, a certain level of insulation I had to put in the walls. Now, we don't have to worry about heating our homes here in the Philippines, but we do have to be concerned about cooling them. Okay, it's the same concept. Okay, a well-built building, adhering to particular building codes, will take less energy to cool to the same temperature. Okay, if you don't have the proper insulation, you can still get the temperature at the right level, but it requires a whole lot more energy. Okay, so that's an example of energy efficiency. Another example would be the LED lighting, or skylights, the lit in daylight lighting. Here in Mindanao, because a lot of your load is driven by your residential class, lighting programs are basically a no-brainer from a cost-benefit perspective. Because you peak in the evening, okay, when it gets dark, everybody turns their lights on, it's evening, everybody's home from work, or at least most people are. And if you look at the load curve for Mindanao, that's when you peak. So when we combine the fact that your main customer class is residential and you're peaking in the evening, lighting programs seem to be a very good fit. And that's why later on today, when we start talking about the cost-benefit model, we're going to work through a couple examples of lighting programs and show what their cost-benefit analysis reveals. Okay, energy efficiency is basically about technology as opposed to changing people's behavior. Okay? It's not about making sure we turn off the lights, it's about having an efficient light bulb in the first place. Okay, so energy efficiency, because we want to maintain the same level of service, is mainly driven by technology. That's why today we talk about LED instead of CFL. Technology has made a leap. Okay, conservation, on the other hand, as Max said, is basically using less energy or reducing peak demand by reducing the level of energy services. One of the big examples is how we set the thermostat. Okay, what temperature do we set the thermostat at to cool our homes? Do we put it at 20? Do we put it at 23? Do we put it at 17? It's going to impact the amount of energy we use. But it's also going to impact our environment. The same amount, lesser energy, but also lesser service. Now, the other thing about conservation, though, conservation is not about technology. Conservation is about changing our habits. Okay? Can we feel comfortable with having a higher temperature on our air cons? Can we feel comfortable in taking a shorter shower maybe not as warm. Okay, can we change our behavior? Many DSM programs, and we're going to talk about different types of programs in a little bit. Many DSM programs rely upon changing people's behavior. Those are the really, really, really difficult ones to implement. I always tell people, old people like me, it's real hard for me to change my ways. I'm a creature of habit. Okay, I like my house to be at a certain temperature. I like to take long showers that are very warm. That's me. I've been that way for 64 years, and hopefully I'll be that way for a little bit longer. But it's real hard to change people like me. So who do we change? So actually, Serge mentioned it. The youth. Okay? Children, that's who we can change. Under other USAID programs, under SEDP, we have a lot of energy efficiency education campaigns targeting the youth. Because there's no hope for the youth, okay? There's no hope for me, okay? I'm stuck in my ways. There's no hope for me. But there is hope for the children. And the other thing we found out when we had these programs in the past for the children, one of the things we found out is that the children would go home and would actually teach their parents. They would influence the behavior of their parents based on what they learned in school. So that's another good reason, okay, if we're talking about changing behavior, we need to include the youth in the program. We get the greatest chance of success when we do that. Okay, let's talk a little bit more in detail about some of the benefits. Max mentioned some of these. We're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail now. I said that price was a big influence. Okay, so one of the benefits is reduces a customer's energy bill. Now that assumes that the customer was a participant in the program. Okay, so one of the selling factors, you're designing a DSM program and you want to get a certain level of participation. The only way for a demand-side measurement program to be successful is at least the participant has to have and see a reduction in his power bill. Why else would he join the program? Okay, unless he's so environmentally conscious that he's going to focus on the emission reductions instead. Reduces the need for power plants, transmission, and distribution construction. This is a part that benefits everyone. Okay, even if you're not a participant, if you can delay construction of distribution lines, if you can delay construction of transmission facilities, if you can delay construction of power plants, that's a good thing for everybody. Okay, society in general benefits from that. Now you notice I didn't say not building power plants, I said delaying. Because we will continue to grow. Our population will continue to grow, our economic development will continue to grow. And I will be showing you in a little bit why those two things impact the power sector so much. So we will continue to grow. What we have to strive for is to become less energy intensive. Okay, I can show you right now how much additional consumption there is every time we add a person to the population. What we need to do is reduce that intensity. Okay, so we can have more people, but we don't necessarily need to have more energy being produced if we become less energy intensive. Stimulates economic development. A country like the Philippines is always going to be concerned with economic development. The island of Mindanao, economic development is critical. If we can control demand, if we can reap the benefits from demand-side management, that will help stimulate economic development, which again benefits society in total. But there's also a downside to it. Economic development leads to higher energy consumption. Okay, so we're recognizing that just like the growth in population, the growth in economic development is going to drive growth in the power sector. If we strive to have development, again, less energy intensive, okay, that's what we want to attract. Creates long-term jobs with benefits to the community. Economic development leads to jobs. Okay? Jobs leads to higher income for families. As I will show you in a little bit, higher income for families requires an increase in energy consumption. I'll show you the statistics in a little while, but it really comes down to two things. More people, more electricity. More economic development, more electricity. More people with more money. That's the combination. Why is that the combination? If we have more people and those people have more money, what do? They buy appliances. Okay, they buy all the gadgets. That's what uses the electricity. It's not the person themselves. It's the aircon they own. It's the ref that they own. It's the TV that they own. So you combine people and money, that's demand for electricity. Increases the competitiveness of local enterprises. If prices come down, the local enterprises can be more competitive. And in today's global markets, that's extremely important. You know, we hear all the time about how prices are so high in the Philippines. And that has an impact on the competitiveness of our domestic industries. Because their market is not just the Philippines. They operate with global markets today. So the Philippines is competing with Vietnam, you're competing with Cambodia, you're competing with Thailand, all your neighbors. And so anything we can do to help mitigate the cost of electricity will make the Philippines as a country more competitive in global markets. Can reduce maintenance and equipment replacement costs. Maintenance is an important part of energy efficiency. Okay, if we stick to the prescribed regular maintenance, the overall cost is lower, the efficiency factor is higher. Reduces emissions that contribute to the environmental problems such as climate change. Okay, I already talked about the INDC. Later on today, when we talk about the cost-benefit model, it's actually a cost-benefit and emissions reduction calculator. It not only calculates the cost-benefit of a particular program, but it also calculates the corresponding reduction in emissions. Okay, so not only are we benefiting society or benefiting the participants, we're also reducing emissions, helping the Philippine government meet its INDC. Enhances national security by easing dependence on foreign energy sources. This is the energy security component that I talked about earlier. Okay, and the Philippines, like I said, even if it has security of supply, it does not necessarily have security of price. DSM and cost-based tariffs. One of the things that APIRA did that has not necessarily happened in some of our neighbors, which is one of the reasons why it's difficult to compare prices in the Philippines with prices in places like planning process. So what is integrated resource planning? Integrated resource planning, unlike a power development plan. A power development plan basically looks at, this is what's happening to my demand, and so I need X amount of supply to serve it. It only looks at generation options to meet that demand. Integrated resource planning looks at every possible option for meeting that demand, not just building more power plants. Okay, so the main thing that it looks at is it looks at not just the supply side, but looks at the demand side as well, through demand side planning. Okay, rather than saying over the next 20 years, we have to add 5,000 megawatts of capacity. Well, that's what the forecast says. But maybe if we implement the appropriate demand side measurement programs, maybe we only need 4,000 megawatts, or even less. Okay? We reduce the need for more transmission, reduce the need for more distribution, reduce the need for more generation by integrating demand side measurements into the planning process. Let's talk now a little bit about the effectiveness, okay, of different kinds of demand side measures. We can have everything from a very firm resource, okay, high reliability, but very low customer choice. Okay, it's a measure that we basically impose upon the customer, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. All it means is that the customer gets the benefit of it without him having to change his behavior and take an affirmative action. Okay, so that gives us a high level of reliability because we're not relying upon a customer changing his behavior. On the other end of the spectrum is the education campaigns, which rely completely on changing people's behavior. Or giving them enough information that they make prudent decisions. Okay, information is very critical. People cannot make good choices. They can't make good decisions if they don't have information. Okay, so let's look at some examples that fit into these different categories. Okay, firm capacity. This resource class allows controlled or scheduled interruptions or cycling of electrical equipment and appliances, such as central air conditioners and irrigation pumps. I'll give you a detailed example of this. When I was a commissioner in the state of Nevada, as you all know, one of the biggest city in Nevada is Las Vegas. Okay, Las Vegas is in the middle of the desert. It's extremely hot in the summertime, extremely hot. So air conditioning load was a very critical part of the load profile for Nevada Power. Nevada Power is the distribution utility that serves Las Vegas. Nevada Power implemented a demand-side measurement program where they went out to individual customers and installed radio-controlled switches in their air conditioning units. So the customer didn't have to do anything. Nevada Power basically ended up with being able to dispatch that load. They could turn the air conditioner off and then turn it back on again. And they determined that you could actually turn it off for a period of time without there being a considerable change in the comfort level in the home. And then you cycle it back on again. Okay, very successful program, very reliable because it was controlled by the utility. Didn't require the customer to do anything except decide to participate in the program. Once they decided to participate, the utility took control and was able to make sure that this was a reliable source of energy savings. Okay, energy efficiency is a good one of the intermediate ones. Okay? This resource class consists of technologies and measures such as high efficiency equipment and appliances, building shell improvements, and controls that reduce energy consumption at the end use level. Okay, this is like the Energy Star rating on appliances, or the EER rating on appliances. Okay, you make these appliances available to the public. Now the public has to decide to buy them. Okay, so that's where you have to combine something like this, an appliance program, with an educational process. Because a lot of times consumers, unfortunately, make decisions based on a short-term view. This appliance is 1,000 pesos less expensive than this other one, so I'm going to buy the one that's 1,000 pesos less. Even though they don't realize that they'll save that 1,000 pesos off their power bill within a couple of years, if they don't know that, if they're not educated on how to make that determination, then they'll end up making the short-term decision. It's 1,000 pesos less, and I'm going to buy that. So these kinds of programs are not as firm of capacity as the first type. Okay, non-firm, this resource class seeks to achieve peak demand savings from actions taken by customers voluntarily based on financial incentive or time-specific price signals. Okay, let's talk about time-specific price signals, time-of-use pricing. Okay, basically what this says is you're going to pay more during the peak hours, you're going to pay less during the off-peak hours. The incentive would be, well, if I can, okay, I'm going to shift my activity from the peak hour to the off-peak hour. Now you notice I said if I can. That's a very important part of time-of-use pricing. The other important part of time-of-use pricing is how big is the actual increment between peak and off-peak. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Okay, the last resource group seeks to achieve peak demand and energy savings by changing customer behavior through information, education, and communication programs, IEC. As you recall a little while ago, I was talking about programs geared towards the youth. Okay, best target for IEC. But there's other ways as well. How many of you have ever put a bill stuffer in your bills that talks about energy efficiency or energy conservation? I can remember when I lived in the U.S., I was served by Sierra Pacific Power Company. I lived in Carson City, Nevada, just south of Reno. I used to get bill stuffers in my bill all the time, telling me all kinds of things about energy conservation. I don't see very much of that here. Because if you develop a good information campaign, you have to make sure you disseminate the information. Disseminating the information is critical to having it have any impact. How many of you have seen this? I'm sure Max has seen this. Comes from the Department of Energy. Seriously, show of hands. How many of you have ever seen that? Serge has seen it, Max has seen it, I've seen it. That's the only hands that went up. So this is from the Department of Energy. Okay, it's an IEC campaign. Okay, telling people ways to conserve. Okay, and it's pretty much geared towards the household. What can the residential customer do to save on their electric bill? Okay, this is the front of the brochure. This is the back of the brochure. And it talks about the EER rating. Okay, it provides people with information, okay, to help them make decisions. Max, maybe when you go back to your office, you can get like 100,000 of these and distribute them to all the folks from all that they use to give to their customers. So education campaigns are important, okay? They can provide a lot of helpful hints, okay? This is, everyday kinds of things. Doing the laundry, ironing, all those kinds of things that are everyday functions in our households. If we do them smartly, okay, we can save. Not only save money, but save the environment as well. Okay, let's talk about the energy rating on appliances. The average person probably doesn't understand how to do this. Okay, if, the housewife is going into SM to buy a new aircon. Okay, do you think she's going to understand how to calculate the payback period of incremental cost? Probably not. Unless someone helps her understand. And that's where the distribution utilities come in. You can help your customers understand. Maybe the next time, it's my understanding the ECs have like an annual, I'm not sure what to call it. You get all your customers, all your members together. Okay? You get this big audience of your customers. Maybe part of the agenda for every one of those annual meetings should be someone getting up and talking about this kind of stuff. Okay? Get the pamphlet from DOE. Go through it with your customers and explain to them how they can save money. I'm sure they would appreciate it. They would probably appreciate that more than you getting them all together and telling them why their rates have to go up. Okay, so take advantage of those opportunities. So how do we figure this out? Okay, so we have two air conditioning units. They both have the same BTU. Okay, their cooling efficiency is the same. Okay, one has an EER of 11.4, the other one has an EER of 13.10. So they have different consumption levels. How many watt hours they consume when they're operating. The lower EER consumes 872.81 watts per hour. So less than 1 kilowatt hour. The higher efficiency consumes only 759.54 watts per hour. Only about 3/4 of a kilowatt hour. Then it's a matter of just applying some arithmetic. Okay, this isn't even mathematics, this is arithmetic. We're multiplying and dividing. How many hours? Okay, say we use our aircon 8 hours a day, 350 days out of the year. So we get a total number of hours, 2,800 hours. So how many kilowatt hours per year? We take the 2,800 times the watt per hour calculation, divide by 1,000. Okay, so we can turn the watts into kilowatts. Then we end up with how many kilowatt hours in a year we will consume. Okay, the next factor in the equation is the retail price. Okay? As a residential customer, what is the retail price that I pay? Now, this is an area where if you were in Metro Manila and you were making this calculation, the answer would be a lot different than if you were here being served by Sapalco, okay, or one of your customers in your franchise area. Why? Because your retail rate is a lot different. Mainly because your generation rate is a lot different. In this particular example, though, we have an 8 peso 50 centavo retail rate. So we can calculate the annual cost of the two different aircons. And we see that there is an annual savings of almost 2,650 or 2,695 pesos per year. If the cost differential was 9,260 pesos, it would take a little over 3 years to make your money back. Now there's certain inputs that are going to affect this. A higher retail rate, the payback would be shorter. A smaller cost differential, the payback would be different. The point I'm trying to make is that without some education, without some additional information, the average consumer will not be able to know this. Okay? They'll look at the price differential, the 9,000 plus price differential, and say, why am I going to pay 9,000 pesos more for the same level of aircon? Okay? Without this information, they make that calculation. How many of you have ever seen this website? whatmatters.org.ph. It's basically an appliance calculator, but it has information specific to different municipalities. Okay, you can actually make comparisons on this website to find out, in my particular locale with my particular rate, what would I save by buying? And it has specific brands of appliances. Okay, so you can make very smart calculations by going to this website. Now, what's the problem? No one knows about this website. Okay, another opportunity for an information, education, communication plan. Okay, this website is specific to the Philippines. Okay, it uses information from the Philippines, the appliances that are sold here. Not just some theoretical calculation, but it talks about the actual appliances that are available in the Philippines. This is the kind of information that customers need. And as more and more customers have access to the internet, there's a wealth of information out there. Okay, you can go to the DOE website. All that stuff that I showed you from DOE is all on their website. Okay, you don't even have to go to their office and get a copy of it. You can see it right on their website. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about how do we design a program. Okay, we've talked about why DSM is good, why we want to do it, what drives us to do it, the financial incentives, the environmental incentives, the energy security incentives. Now let's design a program. Okay, the first thing we have to decide is what kind of a program are we going to have? Okay, we have three choices we can make. Let's start with the information campaign. Okay, we decide we want to have an information campaign. There's other decisions that have to be made. Do we want to have a general kind of message to a general audience where we talk about things like energy efficiency, kind of like with the DOE brochure? Or do we want it more sector specific? Okay, if we go back to the DOE brochure, I would say that is basically sector specific. It's aimed at residential customers. Now, every DU has residential customers. So there's no reason why every DU in the entire country shouldn't be disseminating information like that. It's not that costly. And besides, you can file with the ERC for cost recovery. It's in the law. So why not take advantage of what's in the law? It was put there for a purpose. Okay, one of the policies was we want to promote energy efficiency. New government policy, we want to meet our INDC. Why would the ERC say no to you trying to follow the government policy? As long as you don't make it too expensive. Financing programs to assist customers with paying for DSM measures. One of the barriers to overcome, specifically when it comes to the new technologies, like with our air conditioning example. New technology usually costs a little bit more, at least in the beginning. Over time, technology costs come down quite a bit. Think about how much we used to pay for computers. Think about how much we used to pay for one of these. Okay? Now, of course, this is a smartphone, but it's just cell phones in general. You can buy a cell phone for less than 500 pesos. Okay, so technology has come way down. Technology has improved and become more efficient and the prices are coming down, but in a lot of cases there's still a price barrier. So one of the DSM programs can be to help customers get over that barrier. Go back to our air conditioning example. We have a 9,000 peso differential in price. Depending on how you design the program and you take it through all the cost-benefit analysis, maybe it would still be cost-beneficial if the distribution utility provided a 2,000 peso coupon to anybody that wants to buy one of those air cons. Okay, you don't necessarily have to make up the total difference. Okay, but if you gave a coupon to your customers and said, you can redeem this coupon for 2,000 pesos off the price of an efficient air conditioning unit, then you could say it has to be at least this efficient for you to get your 2,000 pesos. Then you go to the ERC and you get cost recovery for the 2,000 pesos from everybody that participated in the program. When it comes to commercial and industrial customers, a lot of times what you'll see is a shared savings approach. Okay, these are normally done not necessarily by distribution utilities, but by energy services companies. I'll go to a factory and I'll tell them, I can save you 25% off your power bill. And all you have to do is give me 20% back. You get to keep the 5%. Or if I'm real generous, I'll tell them, you can keep the 15%, okay, and I'll just take 10%. You share in the savings. Okay, so the distribution utility or the energy services company becomes a partner with that industry in trying to lower the cost of power, reduce the level of emissions, and reduce the level of energy required. Rebates, that's kind of like my discount coupon example. And you can do it for other things as well. You can, one of the case studies that we'll be looking at is a situation where the distribution utility teams up with a retailer to give 50% discount on LED lights. Okay, so that it's basically like giving a rebate, like giving a coupon. Okay? From the customer's perspective, all he sees is the reduced price. Now the retailer is made whole because the distribution utility pays the retailer to give the 50% discount. And then he goes to the ERC and gets cost recovery. Alternative rate designs. In my opinion, these can be effective in certain circumstances. Right now in the Philippines, they're not effective. Now, why are they not effective? Two reasons. First of all, in Luzon and Visayas, well, let me back up one step. The only entity other than Wesson that offered time of use pricing was NPC. Okay, here in Mindanao right now, you still buy probably the majority of your power from NPC Pasad. For example, we're here in Cagayan. Sapelco buys about 60% of its supply, even today, from NPC. Okay, and there's a time of use pricing schedule. How much do you think Meralco buys from NPC? 0. In Luzon and Visayas, almost nobody, a couple of small exceptions, almost nobody buys from NPC anymore. Why? All the power plants have been gone. All the IPP contracts have been privatized. So there's no time of use price signal other than Wesson, which is not a time of day pricing, although it is hourly pricing. I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's no price signal going out. Now here in Mindanao, you still have a price signal going out, but it's only at the wholesale level. The end-use customer doesn't see it because it's only in the wholesale rates. Unless your DU decided to have its own time of use program where you can mirror the NPC rates, but that's done on a voluntary basis. And I know that when Morocco tried it, very few people signed up. So I don't know if any of you have voluntary time of use pricing or not, but if you do, I'll bet you don't have very many customers that take advantage of it, if any. It was not a very successful program. Don't worry, I'm going to go back to those. I should have reordered these slides a little bit. I want to keep talking about time of use pricing. There's another reason why time of use pricing in Mindanao would not be very successful. In addition to it only being at the wholesale level, the increment between off-peak and peak here in Mindanao is very small compared to what it was when there was time of use pricing in Luzon and Visayas, particularly in Visayas. There was a huge differential between the peak rates and the off-peak. If you look here, the off-peak hours in the peak here in Mindanao runs from about 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. You'll notice that the price only jumped from 2.9 to 3.2. Relatively small increment. Okay, so what you're telling people is you're only going to save a little tiny bit if you go to the trouble of trying to shift your load. Okay, now, given the fact that one of the main drivers of peak demand in Mindanao is residential lighting, there's very little you can do in terms of load shifting when it comes to lighting. Why? Because you can't control when it gets dark. Okay, unless you try things like daylight savings time and all that stuff that they do in the U.S. So why? That's one of my favorite questions, why? And my favorite question is why, and my favorite answer is it depends. Because it's usually nothing in the power sector is ever strictly black and white. Okay, there's all kinds of exceptions. So when you ask why, the answer is always, well, it depends. So why is this differential? Okay, we have to go back. We have to go back in time. The year is 2003. Yeah, that's right, I said 2003. Okay, 13 years ago. This is how the time of use prices were determined for NPC. They looked at their plant stacking. Now these were the plants and contracts that they had in 2003. Okay, very different than today. The numbers that are up there are the variable cost associated with the different generation technologies. If we have a lot of irrigation pumps, you can look at ways to cycle them, have interruptible rates for them. Once you know how they use it, the next thing is to know when they use it. What is the load curve? We talked about energy intensity, and we talked about what drives the price or drives the demand for electricity. And I told you earlier that it's basically people with money. Now, I'm going to prove to you why that's correct. Okay, this is actual information from the Philippines. Okay, it plots population against generation. In other words, people against kilowatt hours. For those of you that took statistics at university, we're doing simple linear regression analysis. And for those that didn't take statistics, but you know how to use Excel, Excel will plot this line for you all by itself. This shows us how does population correlate to energy use. Okay, and you can see that it has a very high correlation. If it was 1, if the R squared was 1, it would be perfectly correlated. This is 0.88. Basically what this says is 88% of the increase in kilowatt hours is due to an increase in population. Now what we hope to do over time is to change this. We change it by having people be less energy intensive. So we have less kilowatt hours per person going forward. Okay, money, household expenditures. Okay, again, Philippine information, household expenditures versus kilowatt hours. And what do we find out? An even higher correlation. Okay, so this basically says there's a very strong correlation between having money and needing electricity. Okay, so that's why when I talk about forecasts and I talk about demand growth, it's all about people with money. That's where the demand comes from. So let's go back now to how we use electricity. Every now and then, the National Statistics Office publishes information about households and what appliances they have and how they spend their money. According to these statistics, and I think this was from 2010, I should have put a source on there, only 2.3% of households in the Philippines use electricity for heating water. 2.3%. A percentage that low would probably tend to make you think that some kind of a DSM program targeted to hot water use would not probably be very successful. Because your target level of participants is only 2.3. Now that's a national average. Okay, if you're Sapalco or Davao Light, a very urbanized area, a very economically developed area, you might get a slightly different percentage. If you're a very rural co-op with basically a residential base, maybe in an agricultural area, you might get an even lower number than 2.3. Okay, so again, if we know how people use electricity, we can target that use. You compare that to the U.S., where 38% of households in the U.S. use electricity for water heating. Now that may seem like a relatively low number, but it's only electricity. The other resource, the other energy resource that is available to almost every household in the U.S. is natural gas. So a lot of people who have access to natural gas will have a natural gas water heater rather than electric because they're more efficient. Okay? But in this slide I was focusing just on electricity because the average household, unless you buy bottled gas, you're not going to have access to natural gas. Okay, refrigerators. Refrigerators are another large consumer of electricity in our households. One of the reasons is they basically operate 24 hours a day, even though the compressors kind of cycle on and off, particularly if it's a frost-free. Okay? But even there, 40% of households in the Philippines have refrigerators versus 99, virtually every household in the U.S. has a refrigerator. Now, 40% is probably a high enough number where you would be able to get significant levels of participation if you had a demand-side program aimed at refrigeration, such as giving rebates to people who want to buy a new refrigerator, give them an extra little financial incentive to buy the most efficient one, rather than the least cost one. But in the U.S., there was even a program, Sierra Pacific Power Company, the distributor that served me in northern Nevada, had a program called the Refrigerator Roundup, where they would actually go out and buy from consumers their old refrigerators. That was their way of providing an incentive to the homeowner to buy a new, more efficient refrigerator. It's kind of like a trade-in program, like taking your used car to the car dealer and trading it in. The power company sponsored a program where you could trade in your refrigerator, which was a fairly successful program from a couple of perspectives. First of all, it gave an incentive to people to buy a more efficient new refrigerator. And the other thing is, in the U.S., a lot of people will take their old refrigerator, stick it in the garage, and use it to keep their beer cold. So this would take that out of the picture. So instead of somebody having two refrigerators, one an old inefficient one just keeping beer cold, they would have one efficient refrigerator. So maybe a program like that, where you basically create a trade-in of old refrigerators for a new efficient one. Just making sure that you set a minimum efficiency level in order to qualify for the trade. Yeah, I'm going to go through this part fairly quickly because this is a lot of the stuff that Max talked about earlier. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to update this slide. Anybody know whose load profile that is? It's nobody in Mindanao. Okay. This is what a typical Luzon Metro Manila load curve looks like. Peaking in the middle of the afternoon. Okay, it peaks in the middle of the afternoon because of all the commercial development, and the middle of the afternoon is the hottest pure part of the day. So when you have a lot of commercial development, you're driven by the air conditioning load of the commercial sector. Mindanao, though, does have the evening peak, and that's your basic peak. So one kind of, when you design a program, you have to have a specific objective in mind. So what am I hoping to accomplish with this program? So one program objective might be to reduce peak demand. Another one might be to reduce total energy consumption. Okay, one objective focuses on demand, another one focuses on energy. You might have another one where the objective is to shift load from peak to off-peak. And we've already talked about that and how it's somewhat difficult to do. And the fourth kind would be to improve the overall load factor. Okay, this is where we get into things like valley filling that Max talked about. Okay, peak shaving or peak clipping, whatever you want to call it. Max mentioned this. Here in Mindanao, where your peak is in the evening, okay, one effective way to shave your peak obviously is with a lighting program. Okay, because that mainly focuses on that evening peak. Okay, so an air conditioning program in Mindanao would not be as effective in terms of reducing peak. It might help reduce overall energy consumption, but it wouldn't be as helpful in reducing peak because the air conditioning load is normally highest in the middle of the day, which is not the time you're peaking. Okay, you're peaking in the evening. Energy efficiency is basically, again, that overall, if I have a more efficient refrigerator, okay, and my refrigerator is running 24/7, okay, and I look at my 24-hour load curve, I'm going to have savings in every hour. Every hour that my refrigerator is operating. So not only do I have savings in the evening when the system is peaking, but I have savings all the time. Okay, so I'm reducing the peak, I'm reducing overall energy consumption, but I'm not necessarily doing anything to improve my load factor. Okay, because I'm simply shifting the load down. It's the same shape. Okay, load shifting, or valley filling, however you want to call it, basically tries to move demand from one area to another. Now this has the benefit of reducing the peak, and it also has the benefit of improving your load factor, because the energy consumption stays the same, but you're flattening out the curve. And we all know the flatter we get the curve, the more efficient we are in using those fixed infrastructure resources. Valley filling. Okay? This doesn't do anything to the peak. This doesn't do anything to total consumption. What it does attempt to do is to flatten out the load. So how could you do that? How could you do that, say, here in Mindanao? Well, one way to do it would be to attract industry that operates mainly at night. Call centers. Okay, now call centers are not very energy intensive, but they do operate at night. And they have the added benefit of changing the lifestyle of all the people that work there. Okay, so you have the ability then to fill in those valleys. Have them use that otherwise unused capacity. Because if you have a new customer coming in and they're going to operate mainly off peak, you don't have to add any capacity. Because you already have enough capacity to meet the peak. By filling in the valley, you're utilizing that fixed amount of capacity more efficiently. Ricky, do you want to take a 10-minute? Okay, we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit, and we're going to talk about the cost-benefit tests. That it has a positive cost-benefit relationship. In other words, the benefits we receive are greater than the costs that are incurred. Now, there are several different tests that we're going to take a look at. They all measure costs and benefits. So you may ask yourself, well, why do we need more than one test? Why can't we just use one? Well, each test looks at the calculation from a different perspective. For example, one test will look at it from the perspective of a participant. The cost-benefit relationship is different if I'm a participant in the program than if I'm not a participant in the program. Another test will look at it more from a societal perspective. Another one will look at it more from the perspective of the total efficient utilization of resources. So we have different ways of looking at these to measure the cost-benefit, and then we have to see if it passes certain tests. Is that something we want to pursue? Later on this afternoon, when we talk about the model that does this for you, and we'll make a copy of that model available to you. In addition to calculating the benefits and the costs, it also calculates the emission reduction. Okay, remember I talked about the INDC and how the government of the Philippines is going to be trying very hard to meet that international commitment. Now you have to remember that at this point in time, the INDC is kind of a voluntary thing. Okay, the countries all around the world made these intended commitments. But at this point, they're not mandatory. But there is a process where if the INDC is ratified, then it becomes a little more of a commitment. But my view of this is a little bit different. I take more of a political view of it. If you tell the international community you're going to do something, and all the countries did that, somebody somewhere is going to keep score. Somebody somewhere is going to say, U.S., you committed this and you didn't meet it. Or the European Union, you committed this and you didn't make it, or you did make it. So somewhere, somebody, even if these are just voluntary, somebody somewhere is going to be keeping score to find out how close you came. Okay, so the final step of calculating the emissions from the Philippine government's perspective is going to be important. Okay, the first test we're going to look at is called the rate impact test. You know, I found it, I told you DSM has been around for a long time, kind of lost favor for a while. But what I found interesting, remember I told you about the one filing at the ERC, that's answer record 2, made back in the late 90s? If you look at the order, they used the same tests to calculate the cost benefit of their program. So, at least for them, this is nothing new. Okay? These tests have been around for quite some time. So the rate impact test, what are the benefits? The benefits are the avoided supply cost. Okay, I don't have to generate a particular number of kilowatt hours anymore, so I avoid that cost. Well, that's the benefit, I'm sorry. The benefit is I don't have to buy so much supply. What are the costs? In this particular test, the costs are the cost of the program itself. Say, for example, you were giving out 50% off coupons, or you were given 1,000 peso rebates. That would be the cost of the program. You might have a one-time administrative cost. But this also looks at one of the other costs, which is the potential lost revenue to the distribution utility. Okay? The reason that it includes that is this test is designed the measure of economics of the DSM program from the perspective of customers who do not participate. Okay, so this looks at it from someone who did not participate. That's why the only benefit is the avoided supply. Whereas if we were looking at this from the participant's perspective, the reduction in his electric bill would be a benefit. The non-participant, and this is where some of these models you have to realize that they're somewhat generic in nature. Okay, they're saying that this is from the non-participant because of the lost revenue. They're counting that as a cost from the non-participant perspective, which you might say assumes that the utility is going to raise its rates in order to make up the lost revenue. Now, in some jurisdictions, that could happen. Okay, here in the Philippines, you might be able to recover some of your cost. Okay, remember the ERC can grant approval of cost recovery. So assuming you got some level of cost recovery from the ERC, that would be a cost then to the non-participating party, your customers who don't participate. As I said, all of these tests are somewhat generic in nature, but they could be made more specific. And I'll point out areas as we go forward where you could actually take one of these generic tests and customize it so that it fits exactly with your EC, fits exactly with the rate-making scheme that all of you are involved in, the RSEC-WR, which I guess at this point we don't really know where it's going to. Those of you that follow the ERC, consulting company out of, I think they're out of Australia or New Zealand, Castalia, came in and did a study of the RSEC-WR and the categories that you're all in and all the classification. And there was a position paper put out for comment, and the ERC is looking at how to modify the RSEC-WR to hopefully improve it. And there's no doubt it can be improved. It was never meant to be carved in stone. It was meant to be a living document that revised over time. So again, going back to these models, it is something that can be customized. And we'll talk about that in more detail. So we're looking at it from the non-participant. Passing the REM test leads to programs that minimize electric rates. Okay, so if one of your objectives, remember we talked about making sure that we had objectives before we design a program. If one of your objectives is to attempt to lower costs, lower rates, then you would want to make sure that you passed the REM test. Passing the REM test eliminates DSM cross subsidies. Okay, the DSM cross subsidy would be between the non-participating customer and the participating customer. It ignores whether a DSM program is in the best interest of the customers who participate. Okay, again, this is totally from the perspective of the non-participant. This test doesn't care whether or not the participant benefits. And it ignores whether a DSM program is good for society. There's no societal aspect to this calculation. Later on, we'll go through what the inputs are to these different models, and you'll see why they come from a different perspective. So the rate impact measure test looks at it from the perspective of a non-participant, and as you might imagine, there's also a participant test that measures the cost-benefit relationship from the perspective of the participant. Now, obviously, the benefits are going to be different. Okay, remember under the non-participant, the REM test, it was only your avoided supply cost that was a benefit. Here, the benefits are the customer's utility bill savings and any other related cost savings, such as reduced operation and maintenance costs. Okay, here you're looking at how this impacts the participant. How much will he save on his power bill? Okay, the cost is the customer's investment to install and maintain, if necessary, the DSM measure. Okay, did the customer have to pay anything? Okay, for example, if the program was to give a 50% off coupon when you bought a LED light, the participant would still have to pay something. He still has to pay the other 50%. So he doesn't get to participate for free. So looking at it from his perspective, he has the benefit that his power bill came down, but it didn't come down for free. He had to pay at least 50% for the light, under my example. So this particular test measures the economics of the DSM program from the perspective of a customer that participates. It ignores the impact on electric rates. Okay, in other words, that 50% half of the coupon that you give to the customer, if you got cost recovery for that from the ERC, this test ignores that. Okay, this test only looks at it from the perspective of a participant. And like the RIG test, it ignores the societal impact. There's no societal adder based on the savings. The next one is called the utility test. Okay, we looked at people who don't participate. We looked at people who do participate. Now we're going to look at the DU. What's the cost-benefit scenario with respect to the DU? Okay, it's the same as the RIM, except it ignores lost revenues of the utility and therefore the impact on rates to consumers. Now again, this assumes that there was cost recovery. Because if there is no cost recovery, there is no impact on customers, but there's an impact on you. Okay, so again, we have to put these tests in their right context. And as I said before, if we wanted to customize these tests to fit with your particular rate setting methodology, we would have to make certain adjustments. It ignores rate impacts and cross subsidies measured by the RIM test. It leads to cross subsidies between participants and non-participants, because you can pass this test and still have a subsidy between participants and non-participants. It ignores the participant test, so we don't care that the participants got a benefit. And it measures change in total utility bills due to the program, but not the change in rates. Total resource test. This is kind of like the all-encompassing one. Okay, it looks at everything. Benefits: avoided supply cost, any avoided participant cost aside from the utility bill going down, the cost of the program costs themselves and the participants' cost. So again, the program cost would be, if it's a lighting program, and say the LED light costs 250 pesos, if the utility was paying 50% of that and the participant was paying 50% of it, the two pieces together would be the program cost. This test measures the overall economic efficiency of a demand-side program from the perspective of society. Okay, this doesn't look at it from the participant or the non-participant or the utility, but it looks at it in total. From a total perspective, is there a cost-benefit, positive cost-benefit relationship? Measures net cost to DSN based on the total cost of the program, including both participant and utility costs. The other ones maybe only look at the utilities cost or only the participants' cost. This looks at both. Ignores the impact of DSN programs on electric rates by ignoring lost revenue. Leads to cross subsidies between DSN program participants and non-participants. Measures of the change in the average utility bill across all customers, but does not consider cross subsidies, nor how many customers are winners and how many are losers. In other words, it ignores the subsidies. It also, I didn't have it on here, but it also does not measure the impact on society. Which leads me to the societal test. The societal test is basically where we bring in to the equation the environmental or potential environmental and social impact of reducing energy consumption and reducing the generation of kilowatt hours. It starts with the total resource test, okay, which looks at everything, not just the utility, not just the participant, not just the non-participant, but everybody. And it adds to that a hypothetical societal factor. Okay, we call these things externalities. This is going to become an important debate, probably before the ERC. Why do I say that? The people that are working on the INDC, going back to the INDC, all the parties are saying we need the ERC to be involved in this process because the power sector is one of the biggest contributors, therefore the power sector has to be one of the biggest contributors to meeting our INDC. So the ERC has to be involved in it. Now, one of the areas where the ERC has to be involved is helping to identify and redefine what we mean by least cost. How do we define what least cost really means? It's kind of like these same tests. Do we define least cost from the viewpoint of an individual distribution utility? You know, you're considering entering into a power supply agreement with a coal plant, and the coal plant is going to sell you energy for $5.50 a kilowatt hour. And you say, well, you know, I compared that to this biomass plant, and the biomass plant wanted 6 pesos. Or I compared it to a run-of-river hydro, who was going to sell to me at 6 pesos. Is the coal plant least cost? If all you look at are the costs based on the contract, you would come to the conclusion and say, hey, the coal plant is less expensive. But if you define cost from a societal perspective, you say, yeah, but that coal plant is going to have emissions. It's going to make it more difficult for us to comply with our INDC. It's going to add health problems and other environmental damage to our country. And there's a cost associated with that. If we consider the externalities, which becomes an extra cost on the coal plant that doesn't exist on the run-of-river hydro, maybe all of a sudden, even under a definition of least cost, the run-of-river hydro is competitive. So at some point in time, the ERC is going to have to deal with that issue. How do we define cost? Do we include some kind of externality in the evaluation? Because when the ERC, they're required to evaluate all those power supply agreements that are used to serve the captive market. They're required to do things like set the feed rate for the feed eligible RE. All of those things have cost implications to the customer. And then at the same time, they have to make sure that they comply with the provision in the PIRA that says provide least cost service to the captive market. So something to think about for the future. Here's a quick matrix to summarize the benefits and costs that are considered in each one of the models. Okay, we have the 5 models across the top. Different kinds of benefits, the avoided supply costs, reduction in customers' bills, environmental matter, and then we have costs. Direct utility costs, direct customer cost, administrative costs, and lost revenue. So those are all the inputs into the model. Some of them are used in certain tests, some are not. And again, it's all look at this from a different perspective. Now, why do we need so many different tests? Why can't we have just one? Now remember how these tests are being used. If you look at that order from Zanzareco 2 back in the 1990s, these tests were used to justify their cost recovery. Okay, by showing what the cost-benefit relationship was, this is how they justify, and rightfully so, that's the right way to do it, justify cost recovery. Now, the reason you need so many different tests is the ERC has a responsibility to all the parties. The ERC has an equal responsibility to the participants, an equal responsibility to the non-participants, and an equal responsibility to all of you. And I could add to that an overall responsibility to society in general. So in order for the Commission to exercise its authority and look out for the interests of all those different parties, some of those interests might be competing, the Commission needs that kind of information. And then they can look at the different tests, they can weigh them, decide which one's more important than others, and use that information in rendering their decision. One other thing we have to talk about real quickly in order to understand how these models work is there's a timing difference. There's a timing difference between when the cost is incurred and when the benefits are received. Okay? Some of the costs. Okay, for example, if you're going to have 10,000 participants and you're going to give them free LED lights, okay, you buy 10,000 lights and you hand them out to your customers. And if you're going to give people new lights, make sure you get something back, because otherwise they'll just have twice as many lights in their house instead of the one you gave them. So that's why most of the lighting programs are an exchange. I'll give you a LED light, you give me an incandescent light. I'll give you a LED light, you give me a CFL. Some type of exchange. So you take something out of the mix, not just add to it. So that cost would be incurred right away. The benefit, though, say that light will last for 9 years. You receive a benefit a little bit every year for 9 years. So there's a mismatch between when the cost is incurred and when the benefits are received. Now, in order to make an apples-to-apples comparison, we have to do something called calculate the net present value. It's actually not as complicated as you might think. Actually, if you're proficient in Excel will actually calculate the net present value for you. But all it really does is say that a peso today is not the same as a peso tomorrow. Okay, if I give you a peso today, or I give you 50 centavos today and 50 centavos tomorrow, you still have 1 peso. It's not the same. Now, why is it not the same? Okay, here's my little test for you. You have 2 choices. I can give you 1,000 pesos today, or I can give you 129.5 pesos every year for 10 years. Now, at the end of the 10 years, if you didn't spend any of your money, you'll have 1,295 pesos. Under the second choice, you still only have 1,000, unless you did something with the 1,000. And what net present value does is it recognizes that you could do something with that 1,000. You could put it into a savings account, and it would accumulate interest over those 10 years. So if we assume one of the things you have to consider in a net present value is the discount rate. The discount rate is kind of like the interest you earn in your savings account. So let's add another assumption to the test. You can take the 1,000 peso and put it into a savings account and earn 5%. Which would you rather have? 1,000 pesos today. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to spend it today. You have to save it. And you can earn 5%. Or I give you $129.50 a year for 10 years. How many would rather have the 129 pesos for 10 years? Nobody? Who would rather have the 1,000 pesos? Nobody wants any money at all? Actually, they're mathematically equivalent. Okay? That's the point of this, is that it doesn't make any difference. Assuming you can earn 5%, that's the discount rate that's used. An annual payment of $129.50 is mathematically equivalent to a one-time payment of $1,000. Now, the reason, as I said, the reason we have to do this is because the cost and benefits occur at different points in time. The cost is incurred up front, like the 1,000 pesos. The benefit is like the stream of payments. They happen over time. So if we want to make an accurate, side-by-side, apples-to-apples comparison, we have to go back and calculate the net present value. So all of these tests, when you see the model, you'll see that the comparison between the costs and the benefits is done based on the net present value. Because the model will calculate the annual benefits as opposed to a one-time cost. Okay, so what do we use these tests for? The tests may be used to analyze the cost effectiveness of DSM programs from different stakeholders' perspectives. Tests may be used to screen programs and select those with the most cost effectiveness. Tests may be used to retrospectively assess the cost effectiveness of a program after they have been in the field for several years as part of monitoring and reporting. Remember, Max talked about monitoring. Okay? Initially, when you're screening your tests, when you're screening your different programs, you're going to use these tests to make a guess, an educated guess, but still a guess is which ones are the best ones.